Well, welcome to the Imperfect Parent Podcast, Gospel Hope for Imperfect Parents. I'm Brendan Willis, and I'm here with Dave and Emma Taylor, and a special guest today. We're in the Taylor home, and we are joined by none other than Willow Taylor.
Wow. Willow.
And Willow, for those who don't know, is a Labradoodle. Is that right?
Yeah.
Labradoodle. We thought we could do another episode down the track podcast for Shepherding a Dog's Heart, a whole series. But we won't be the people doing that. We haven't got a clue what we're doing.
I'm not sure if it's easier or harder than Shepherding a Child's Heart.
I would say that Willow is by far the most experienced biblical counselling dog in the church. She's been on more.
She's experienced many things.
She's heard a lot of things.
But she doesn't apply any, so she's not very wise.
Not a thing. Not a thing.
But she's cute, and she does. Now, obviously, no one can see what this room has, but basically, in some crazy-sized TV that the Taylors have, we've got a fireplace going.
COVID
That's
spend.
Dave, all Dave.
COVID spend.
And so it's very Willow. It's very warm, and it's pretty special evening. Tonight, we're here to talk about something pretty close to home for me and my generation. That's the millennials listening in. And that's how we think about ourselves and parenting, the millennial mindset in parenting. And I think it's pretty safe to say that the way we think about parenting all across the world has changed pretty dramatically in the past 40 years. Globally, there's been a massive decline in the number of people even having kids in the first place. And I think what most commentators would agree is there's been a huge shift in the way people think about parenting and the mindset. And so just to get us kind of thinking about this, I'm going to play a clip that really resonated with me. It's about the one-child policy in China. And it's from the ABC. And I listened to it and I thought, wow, this sounds not just like China, this sounds exactly like my generation. It's from the ABC program, If You're Listening, with Matt Bevan. It's called China Miscounted Its Population. Now the economy is in crisis. Have a listen.
Children born in the 1980s and 1990s in China became the first generation of only children.
The Chinese call them Xiao That means little emperors, a pejorative label for only children.
The population began to skew wildly male as people avoided their only child being a girl with abortion, abandonment, or straight up murder.
These only children grow up without the tempering influence of brothers and sisters.
There are now millions of Chinese bachelors going to great lengths to make themselves more appealing to women. This phenomenon has actually driven up property prices, as owning an apartment is seen as a prerequisite for marriage. In 2013, the new Chinese President Xi Jinping started to unwind the policy.
But under a new rule, couples will be allowed to have a second child if either parent has grown up as an only child.
Then everyone was allowed to have a second child. But there was a problem with that.
Maybe after 5 or 3 years, we can consider about that. But from now on, I think the only one child is enough for us.
The millennials were the best educated, most fawned over Chinese generation ever. And they wanted to raise their kids as little emperors too. Professor Yi Fuxian said people didn't want more kids, and even if they did, they now couldn't afford it.
If I have a second child, this apartment will be too small. We'll need to move somewhere bigger.
A top family planning official had projected that dropping the policy would lead people to start having 4-child families again. Problem solved. But people did not start having 4 kids.
When the one-child law was finally abolished, China experienced a small jump in the birth rate in 2016. But that was followed by a drop the next year.
In fact, the birth rate continued to fall. Yi Fuxian had been right.
So what's your reaction to that video?
There's a lot of things in there that are just very sad, really, as I listen to that. It's curious that obviously they had a one-child policy and then they opened it up and people still just wanted one child, but the reasoning behind all of what they do, really, it's not obviously biblical and quite grievous in many ways.
Such an impressive system to force sterilisation on millions of people. But the interesting consequence then of where you have to have only one kid, the fruit of that becomes you lavish everything on that one kid. And then you want, if you're that kid, you want then to raise your kids in the same way. Mm-hmm. And I just was listening to it and I was like, do you know what? That feels strangely similar to, I think, how many people in our context now think about parenting. We're not too far away from, by choice in our context, having a one-child policy anyway. The birth rate in Australia has been falling. It's the lowest it's ever been.
Yeah,
it's at 1.6 births per woman,
right,
which is a sharp decline.
I'm not quite sure how that works. 0.6 for a child.
Yeah, awkward for the 0.6,
but it is. Without immigration, Australia's shrinking.
Yeah, rapidly shrinking. And there's very few countries outside Africa that are above the replacement rate, i.e. the population's just on its own going to stay the same. So it's interesting. It's actually a global phenomenon at the moment all around the world, that the world is soon to be quickly shrinking.
Which I think it's sad, isn't it? When you think, as Dave was saying, it is sad. I think when you think about how the Bible talks about children and being a gift, a reward, a beautiful inheritance, fill your quiver with them, which, Brendan and Charlotte did a great job.
We're working on it. We're working.
You got multiple quivers.
I haven't probably said, we were questioning earlier in the series, I remember now, whether or not we were having twins, so I can put that to rest. We're not having twins.
No, triplets. Congratulations.
You don't know 100% until they're born, Brendan.
Well, they could be very good at synchronized swimming on the ultrasound. But no, we've got our fourth boy coming. So
wonderful.
So in October. So
wonderful.
We're looking forward to that.
But I think, just thinking, how wonderful that is and how beautiful that is and what a gift that is from God. Within that video, you obviously there's no sense of that. It's all about practicalities and what works. And then, as you say, pouring, what do we think we need to make this one child successful and happy? And obviously no mention of God at all. So it's very sad the way the
times have changed a ton, haven't they, in terms of what we expect. I mean, my grandma brought up 5 kids, including my mum, in a 3-bedroom house, and people thought of that as normal back then. And they had an outside toilet. They really didn't even have an inside toilet. Whereas now people would be horrified. It's changed a ton.
Oh, definitely. I think now if you have a larger family, often there can be a sort of a feeling of quietly, I don't think there's many people that would say it to your face, but this seems irresponsible.
Absolutely.
Maybe irresponsible environmentally towards the environment, or even to be able to give the kid everything that every parent should give the kid. Because we're the generation that grew up, watching Disney and, this whole theme in every Disney princess film, which is you can be whoever you want to be, whatever you want to be. Yeah. And I think as parents, we feel then like an obligation. Well, I have to give my kids every possible opportunity, or maybe that would make me a really bad parent if somehow I can't give that to them.
Yeah, I think I've probably felt that a little bit actually, even as people listening know, most people, we have 5 kids, and I think sometimes when I meet new people and they ask that question, I can almost feel like I have to justify why I have 5 kids. Because as you say, people are shocked, they're like, whoa, and just, it's not necessarily seen as a good thing. It can be seen as an irresponsible thing. Yeah, so you're right in that.
Just another thought, for my generation as well, I know in some ways, it used to be the case that kids were thought as sex, marriage, having children, being a parent, all kind of belong together. Whereas increasingly that's not the case. Each of those are their own individual category of choice for you personally as the individual. And so I think one of the things I've noticed in my generation is increasingly being a parent is kind of like a capstone achievement. It's like you want to get established in your career, you want to then get married, you want to travel as much as you can with your spouse, and then once all those boxes have been ticked, then you're ready to be a parent. And I think that also has an effect on how many kids are possible and so on and so forth.
Right.
Because our whole frame of reference, for us millennials is just really different.
Yeah, I mean, when we got married, Brennan, our 3 biological kids, Emma had finished having them by the time she was 26.
Right.
Whereas now most people maybe don't even start till they're 30, which is fine. There's a preference attached to that, but it's a different dynamic altogether that's going on today than what it used to be.
Well, and there's the sovereignty of God in that. Sometimes that's not people's choice. That's just the way the path God.
Yeah, good counter.
Slow bloomers like me. I think I was 34 when I had a light.
Slow bloomer. Slow bloomer.
God was patient.
No, I'm talking in a situation where it is choice, where somebody's choosing. We're going to get married, then we're going to go traveling, then I'm going to finish my degree, then I'm going to do the house. Okay, that's all valid. But that obviously does delay things somewhat.
But one of the things we want to talk about is, just our whole outlook, as our generation, as millennials. Most parents out there are millennials. If you are, a Gen X parent or, older, a shout out to you as well. But just recognizing most people are sort of my age or even Gen Z stepping into parenting. And we want to think about just some of the things we assume about parenting, our outlook. And the problem with outlook is, it's all around us, so we can't actually see it. We don't actually know it. There's a famous quote from David Foster Wallace, who uses this illustration of an old fish swimming past two younger fish and says, "How's the water today, fellas?" And those other fish swim by and they go, "What the heck is water?" Yeah. The point being, when you're in it, you don't even notice those things. It's just the air you breathe. It's just the water that's all around you. And so you guys obviously are a different voice as, I think, Gen Xers. Is that right?
Oh,
I think so.
I
think you're borderline, Em.
Yeah, so, I'm much younger than Dave, much younger.
I married a younger woman.
That's
it. But
you
make a soundation. We're really not that old.
Brennan wheeled us in this evening to make a start on this podcast.
Although Liam likes to remind me I was born in the 1900s.
Yeah. You were so old, Mum and Dad. You were born in the 1900s.
Wow. Well, I mean, you guys started out parenting in 2002. How have you seen the outlook of parents change over the past 22 years?
Yeah, look, I think it's changed a lot in a relatively short space of time. I mean, you're looking at 22 years since we became parents. The world has changed a lot. Now, some of that I think is probably where we were living. We were in Newport, South Wales, so things were very settled. People were often in multi-generational families, not even thinking about moving away, much slower pace, so on and so forth. But I think even then, generationally, things have shifted a lot as well. I think one of the big things that we've seen, but speak into it, Emma, is the sort of growth in child-centered parenting. So for Emma and I, and our peers, when our younger kids were born, we just bundled them up, and they came and did everything with us. So when actually Josh was born, Emma and I were leading the youth ministry. We just stuck him in a backpack and he came with us the whole time.
Just to confirm, that was a kid's backpack.
A kid's backpack, not a random backpack.
We didn't shove him in our backpack.
Yeah, so Friday night he'd come with us, then we did young adults on a Sunday, he'd come with us
Cancel
again.
that call to docs.
Yeah, that's right. But he just sort of, the premise was, he's entering into mum and dad's world and he's just coming with us. And everybody did that. That was just the norm. I think we put him in kids ministry and he was about 3 weeks old.
Right.
We went on a date night. He was about 2 weeks old. It was just very much, hey, the mum and dad are the priority. And then we're going to serve this kid as best as we can by pulling him into our world. It was very different. Back in our day, if the kid needed to go out because there was a challenge on a Sunday, one parent would go out. Whereas now it's often both parents go out. And, okay, that's just different. That's a different philosophy, a change of thinking. There's obviously a lot fewer mums being at home now with their kids, which I'm not saying is right or wrong, to be quite honest. But just as a general observation, most mums were at home, were in our generation and at the church we're in. We used to have a mothers and toddlers group every day of the week apart from Monday throughout the whole year because so many mums were staying at home. What's your thoughts?
I think two things spring to mind when I think about that question. I think one is just the sheer number of voices that these days that parents have.
That's so true.
And I feel sorry for young parents that are just beginning the journey of parenthood, because like I don't remember. I'm sure the internet was around when we had Josh, but it wasn't
like that.
It wasn't full of like blogs and you get podcasts like telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing. It's a bit like food. 1 minute you should be eating bacon, the next minute you shouldn't be eating bacon. You know, like it's just like, and I feel like parenting is the same. I think there's so many voices that can just be really confusing, telling you what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and how you're going to damage your kids and what this will do. So
on the whole, when we were young, you didn't know what you were doing, so you asked your parents and people older than you that had kids. That's as far as you didn't look on the blog.
I feel like
you didn't even tend to buy a book. You actually just asked older people that you respected. How did you do it?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And you know, something I was recently reading was talking about how the rise of technology and AI in particular is further exacerbating that as well. So increasingly now, people will turn to AI for answers rather than asking mum or asking a parent or and you know, AI's got its own whole set of problems, but more than that, what you miss is genuine relationship, people filled with the Spirit of God, with the Word of God, who know you and who can, you know, speak God's truth to you in a powerful way. And we're increasingly becoming insular instead, and some of our technology is feeding that and fanning it a flame.
I think the other thing I think I notice more is just the fear in parenting. I think the fear of kids. I think the fear of being an authority to your kids, and I think just the focus on being their friend, being their mate, which, you know, we're all for good relationships with your kids, absolutely. But I think just that difference between kids are kids, like even... Oh, I don't know. It's just an example. I don't have a problem with kids calling adults by their first names at all. No. It's completely preference. But that's a very new thing. Like years back, like when I was growing up, no, you wouldn't have called an adult by their first name because they're not they're not your mate. Sorry, struggling my voice here. They're not your mate. So it was auntie and uncle or Mr. and Mrs. And as I said, I don't have a problem with the first name thing. But just to example, I think just the gap between a child and an adult has
the authority. I think in our generation, the authority gap was emphasised in a good way. You respected your elders in that sense, whereas now it's pretty much plateaued. We're all the same.
That's right.
That 4-year-old's one of your mates. And
that's
like,
right.
This is very different.
Well, you don't hear it with teachers. Like when you listen to what teachers deal with these days. Like when I was in school, make myself sound old now. Like you didn't say no to a teacher. Like if they asked you to do something, you didn't pick and choose what you wanted to do. You didn't even say no to your parents. It was just this sort of accepted thing that there was this authority, and I think that's very different now.
I was recently having a conversation with Dr. Kate, so shout out to Dr. Kate. And I was talking about a podcast we got coming up, a couple of episodes from now, where we're going to be talking about some of those challenges with things like ODD. And I was asking her about it in schools, and she's working for the Department of Education, and she was telling me it's absolutely everywhere.
Yeah,
kids that are disrespecting authority, very difficult to manage their behaviour, And I can see how we have a lot of fear of just messing it up in our generation.
Yeah.
A shout out to you if you just joined listening into this podcast for the first time. Episode 4, we actually have a whole episode that's kind of on this topic. So you might want to head back and if we haven't been cancelled by now, have a listen to that one and hopefully that's helpful as well.
Yeah.
But I did want to move us on to thinking about our culture from a slightly different angle. And, you know, this is an episode that we've entitled all about worship. How do we know if we're worshipping our kids? Where do you think there might be some unique temptations, given our context, to worship our kids, to give them the love that we should only give to God alone?
Yeah. It's an interesting one, and it's in many ways it's a hard one to answer succinctly. But I remember like Tim Keller used to talk about finding the cultural narrative in your culture. What's the cultural narrative? And then letting the gospel speak into it. And I don't think it takes long to realise the cultural narrative of Sydney is I'm going to work really hard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and evenings and weekends I'm going to serve my kids hard, which really means my kids are going to be my world. I'm going to do all I can to make them a success and make sure they're thriving in life. I think that is the cultural air we breathe, to be honest, in our unbelieving world.
Yeah.
But because that's the cultural air we breathe, I think it is very, very easy for Christians to just dive on that and not even check that nor think that through and just assume that's the norm. That if unbelieving parents do that, how much more should we do that? Because we really love our kids. So I think we're very tempted to worship our kids because that's what the culture, I think, actually does. And so we're tempted to buy into exactly the same thing, not realizing that what that means is your kids are your idols.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see for so many people around us, that line, my kids, my world, I've heard that many times from friends that don't know Christ. And
it even seems noble.
It does,
I'm just giving my life away for somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think, I'm applauding that in the right way, but kids make great kids, but lousy gods.
Yeah.
And for some people, they're gods.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember Tim Keller saying, if you make gods of children, either you'll be crushed with disappointment when they don't meet your expectations, or you'll crush them with your expectations. So either way, it's going to go badly. I kind of feel like it oscillates between this idea of my kids and my world to my kids, and maybe it's just because of the season we're in of really little ones. My kids are an inconvenience to me of, I wish I could, eat at that Italian restaurant. I wish I could go on those holidays. And to find ourselves maybe sort of grumbling and complaining about our kids a lot. And kids are an irritation. They're an annoyance. Anything you want to add to that, Em, that you've observed?
All good points.
Particularly when they're young as well, by the way. Just on that point, particularly when they're young. It's like, oh my gosh, how can I get them out of the way? When they get a bit older, maybe I can bring them back.
Yeah, I think, again, as we talked about, I think the whole internet, social media thing, just the amount of things we see on there of how other people are parenting their kids, the opportunities they're giving the kids, that can kind of propel us into thinking, oh, maybe I should be doing that, or maybe I should be giving my kids these opportunities, or parenting in this particular way, or putting them in that particular school. So I think again, just the voices and the examples around us are very influential in that.
Absolutely. And you can get how kids become people's world. Like, they're made in the image of God. And when a child does well in something, as a parent, there's something so intoxicating about that. You feel so incredibly proud. You want to yak on to every person about it. Like, I had to check myself, first when one of our kids, as you guys know, was just showing like really gifted in some things, you just the temptation to constantly be like, well, look at this amazing thing that they can do today, So there is something in that, in that our kids are made in the image of God, that I can see how then, because it's such a good and beautiful thing, or when they say something really beautiful, that they love you and make you feel just this really special way that you could then make them everything.
Totally. When you just think about it very plainly, we can understand why we delight in them, because they're a gift. A gift
and it's
from
good
God.
To delight
it's
in them.
A wonderful thing to enjoy that gift. But what we forget is they're a gift given for us to worship the giver with, and to point them to the giver is the primary aim in what we're trying to do in their lives. We can forget the giver bit and just receive the gift and enjoy the gift, and then even forget to maybe worship the gift, rather than understanding, no, this gift was to point to the giver, which is the very place where to point them as well.
Well, and recognising ultimately they're not ours. They don't belong to us.
That's so good.
They're given for a time.
Yeah, and we don't know how long we're going to have them.
Exactly.
No, that's right. We're just called to be ambassadors of Christ to them.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit. We're actually wanting to talk, in this session about gospel-saturated parenting, like not just buying into the stories, the alternative gospels that people all around us kind of believe, but to look at it through the lens of the beautiful story we have, the mindset we have, the way of thinking of life we have, to be parents with kind of Jesus's lens at looking at life that way. And it's probably worth actually spending some time just kind of thinking about, well, what are some of the different ways that people approach life and parenting in our city? You see, often like how we look at the world, it's not formed so much about our desires or by our desires. I think that's kind of like what we tell ourselves in our culture, like you are what you feel, but often it's actually the stories we tell ourselves. And obviously as Christians, we get given this beautiful story of the gospel, but there's some other competing stories. So I thought it'd be helpful just to unpack just two really common stories that people just in our city and in a lot of the West would hold to. The first story is kind of the story of secular liberalism, and there's kind of this idea that the big problem in the world is that we've just got limited personal freedom. There's things that are stopping us from being free. And so we look back in the past and we think, yeah, it's the Enlightenment, the age of reason. That's what the big defining moment in the world has been. And there's this idea that as we struggle through developing new technology and science and technology and education, that ultimately in the end, reason will triumph. The world will gradually improve and improve and improve. And that's kind of the hope that we have for the future. And to look at parenting through that lens, kind of the fruit of that is, we look at our kids and we go, well, the most important thing for my kid is education, is their personal freedom. I don't want to impinge on their freedom. I need to let them choose for themselves. They need access to every opportunity. The second one that's really common that I think we're all really influenced by is consumerism, which is this idea that as we think about the big problem our kids face, is that what really is the biggest obstacle is like a lack of stuff, a lack of material prosperity. And so as we look back, we think the big turning points in life is like the Industrial Revolution, capitalism, and the achievement of material goals. And so this life is kind of like a struggle with possessions and finding financial security and just enjoying your life as much as possible, with the hope that in the future you just might retire up the coast in comfort and just to be happy. And so then kind of like looking at life and parenting through that lens, it's kind of like, well, what my kid needs most is like they need financial security. They need quality holidays. They need to get ahead in life. They need career options. And so the question I want to throw to you guys is, okay, if they're the two kind of what I would see is like the big kind of lenses that people can look at life through. And, I think a lot of people would have kind of a mix of both those. What does it look like to look at life through the lens of the gospel? So how would you guys kind of like think about that, or let's just talk about that?
Yeah, I think liberalism sort of paradigm and the consumerism paradigm is what our present culture looks through, both of them in different ways, and aims at those things. But in light of eternity, neither of those lenses are going to help our kids at all. Not unless we're saying the functional savior of our kids' life is their education, or their freedom, or as long as they can have quality holidays, then that'll function as their savior. I mean, it's actually mindless when we think of it. The lens of the gospel is all about that my kid's greatest problem is not their education or their lack of holidays or whether they're very good at sports or any of the above. My kid's greatest problem is their sin before God.
Yes.
And the pervasive evil they face in their flesh, and primarily in the way the world fans that into flame, and in the way the devil also wants to point on those things and breathe on those things. So the greatest challenge any kid has is that they're cut off from God. They're cut off from the Father who made them and loves them and sings over them and who can change their life. That's their greatest need. And so if we give ourselves to ensuring that our kid can kick a soccer ball well, and they end up with a whole room full of medals, in light of eternity, that means nothing if they don't know Christ and if they haven't dealt with their heart. So I think the gospel lens starts with, my kid's got a problem. And the answer is Jesus. The turning point in their life comes when they understand, I have a problem, but Jesus is the answer. It's the John Newton quote, I know I'm a great sinner, but I have a great Savior. That's what changes a kid's life, when they realize the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ as our substitute and representative has changed everything in my life. And because of my faith in him, I can be redeemed and forgiven and adopted, and that I can know heaven is my home. Now, there is still then a present struggle, because it's called life. It's the race that we're all in. And it's the race that any kid or adult is in, having put their faith in Jesus. We're in exile here. The best is yet to come. But right now we're in a race and we're pursuing Jesus, telling people about Jesus. But our future hope is found in the resurrection of the body and the new heaven and the new earth that is going to come through Jesus Christ. So the whole point of the gospel lens is my kid's greatest problem is their sin. Jesus is their greatest answer. And now their life is an opportunity to worship him, all on the understanding that the best is yet to come. That's life-changing.
Yeah, like, stop you right there. Like, I mean, just seeing that the greatest problem my kid faces is their sin.
Yeah.
That is so countercultural. Like, I think
for
it's
sure.
so easy going, well, greatest problem my kid's facing right now is I need to get them into Barker College, and the waiting list is, however many years. Or, like, I just want to set them up. Or their greatest problem is just, I need some strategy to stop them fighting with each other, or I need to help them with this, sickness that they're struggling with. Or, but to say the greatest problem in their life right now is pervasive evil.
Yes. It's game changing, because I think we can be so tempted, and I understand it. I mean, I'm no different. We're here fully. The greatest problem is their sin. And so when we think about our urgency of what we're trying to deal with in our kids, what are we so like, man, I need to be intentional about this? It's actually seeing them come to know Jesus and see their sin for what it is. So like the example you just given, the temptation in our culture is totally like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get them into Barker? Well, why? Because they need to have good grades. Why? Because they're going to need a good job. Why? Because they'll never afford a house if they can't. There's all these anxieties we're carrying as a parent that actually have nothing to do with at all their greatest need.
No,
right.
And so we're looking through the wrong lens as to what does my kid actually need. They desperately need Jesus.
Well, and also who is the focus of the parenting, and like you're talking about being child-centered, like that's the thing with those secular approaches, is it's very child-centered, whereas looking at parenting through the gospel lens, it's God-centered. It's about God. Like life isn't about our kids, and I think that's very countercultural. Like life is just about us. Like everything is about us. Everything is about our kids. Whereas I think through the lens of the gospel, parenting, like everything else, is about God. So okay, what does He want us to do? How does He want us to parent our kids? We are stewarding our kids for God in the same way we're stewarding our money and everything else that is a gift from God. So I think it completely changes everything.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think it's so easy to have this big disconnect, right? As parents, like that are followers of Jesus, we, on the one hand, know the story of the gospel, and we know that intellectually, but then to look at the task of parenting and just there to be this mismatch. So probably just like pressing that down a little bit more, like, okay, if to look at the whole task of parenting through the lens of the gospel, like how would that, what are some other ways in which that would kind of like reframe how we even think about parenting, or like what beautiful resources we have as parents to love and serve our kids?
Yeah, and this is where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? What does it really look like to think about parenting through the lens of the gospel? It's got to have some details on it. I think one of the best books I read on it, though to a degree confronting, because you're like, man, this is going to be hard, but it was the Instructing a Child's Heart by
Ted.
Yeah, I think it's Ted Tripp. Yeah, one of those guys.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
And it was the introduction that got me. The whole premise being that whether your kids go to state school, private school, homeschool, doesn't make any difference. But understanding that the whole of their life while they're in your home is a classroom.
Yeah.
Everything. The whole thing.
That's good.
And so it's a whole thing to point them to Christ and Him crucified, to the goodness of God, to dazzle them with who God is, dazzle them with the gospel. So I think that lens sort of starts to change everything. So, for example, when we started the kids at Pacific Hills, which we found worked well for us, one of the things I loved was the way they were supporting things we were saying at home. For example, and when they went into middle school, they all got iPads. And one of the things the head of year he said, "Oh, take your iPad out of your bag." This is the first day of school. And they held it in the air and he said, "You know what? You are going to get so excited about this iPad. You think it's going to change your life. But I just want you to know this iPad is nothing compared to Jesus. Jesus is the best thing."
That's great.
And I was like, thank you, Jesus. This is just so encouraging that a teacher would stand up and say that. But it's moments like that. You don't have to go to a Christian school to say that. You can say that yourself. But what are we teaching our kids? Is soccer the greatest thing in our lives? Is netball the greatest thing in our lives? Are iPads the greatest thing in our lives? Is it the movies? So I think just in terms of what are we actually saying and what are we cheering and championing and applauding?
Yeah.
Are we applauding values that are biblical or values that are actually just worldly? I think it can be one of the lenses that we use.
What do you guys find the hardest about that? You know, trying to keep this gospel focus in parenting.
I think for me, I know it's very easy for me to take on cultural lies and values that and think, oh, I should be doing this or I should be doing that, or they need this or they need that. So I think that would be just listening to the voices around me. If I'm not regularly soaking myself in God's word and his priorities and what he says to me, and reminding myself again and again of the biblically what we're called to do as parents. I can definitely very quickly take on cultural values and listen to those lies.
That's so easy, isn't it? Like, you know, an example that comes to mind is like your kid gets invited to the birthday party and it's on a Sunday morning. Yeah. Every parent thinks the same thing. They think, I don't want my kid to miss out. But the key question is, miss out on what?
Yes, that's right.
And I think that's the follow-on question that really gets to the heart of what is the lens through which you're looking at this kid and the task that God has entrusted to you. Because if it's what our intuition is, I don't want them to miss out on sowing into friendships. Suddenly, friendships are really good, but, you know, it's one piece of many important pieces, but versus I don't want them to miss out on hearing more about Jesus, because Jesus is everything. And I don't want them to miss out on seeing that Jesus is the center of our lives, not them, that they're peripheral, they orbit around God at the center. And so it's those critical moments where your heart is kind of feeling torn in a way, because there's obviously this pull that like I do want to give the best to my kid, but am I looking at that through the lens of what Christ says really matters?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, I think we would be remiss to think that our own flesh as a mum and dad plays no part in what we emphasize in parenting. I think that would be incredibly naive. It does play a part. And I think sometimes the challenges we actually have, Brendan, is as and when you have a kid that is actually very gifted at something. The temptation then to be like, well, man, they're a great singer or they're great at sport or whatever it be, to start really fanning that into flame, and at whatever cost, let's go after that, because maybe that's a gift that God's given them and maybe wants them to use it in some incredible way. But your own ability to start making compromises then is quite significant, because you just want to see this gift. And I think that's sometimes your flesh. It's your flesh streaming in to that narrative. You start compromising all sorts of things to support this kid, and you think, well, why? What are you trying to do?
And then the fear can come in that again. Oh my, what's my child going to think if I don't let them do this? They're going to hate me. Like, then are they going to grow up and then resent church? Like, you hear all those sort of things, and we've definitely battled those fears and asked those questions ourselves in terms of trying to balance that. So. Yeah, I think
one of the it's funny, when you say what's some of the hardest things about maintaining gospel focus. I think one of the things that's hard is if you're doing it well, then I think you can feel just to the right of a nut job sometimes, in that sense of, oh my gosh, we are talking about Jesus all the time. Everything talks about God and church and, oh, look at the sky, isn't it amazing? Yeah, God made that, check that out. You can feel like it's a bit over the top. One of our kids even said, as they're growing up, why does everything have to come down to God in this house? And you can feel it's a bit over the top. But actually, I would just think you're serving them big time. Because the answer to that kid in that is, it comes down to God. Because everything does come down to God. Right. That is the way the universe works.
That's right.
And it's a good thing.
Yes.
So I think it can be difficult, because if you're spending a lot of time in our culture, which we invariably are, unbelievers aren't doing this at all. They're championing other things. And then the temptation in your flesh could be like, oh, I can't let my kids get behind other people. They're going to be competing against them. This is what parenting seems to look like in my culture. And there's a cultural pressure on us that's coming from within, but is also coming from without in the world. And then Satan loves to have a field day with that and distract us. Any way he can distract us from the Lord and his people and his bride, he will gladly do at the first opportunity. And if you really are worshiping your kid rather than God, you will go down a rabbit trail following your kid very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some ways, when you think about it, you know, giving a really little person free rein to set the agenda for your life is probably not a wonderful idea, particularly when they're my kids' age.
Yeah.
But I just really resonate with what you're saying about our personal sin, you know, and our hopes. And one of the thoughts I was thinking about just as you were speaking is, especially like maybe things that you personally found hard as a kid.
Yeah.
You know, there were seasons in my life where, you know, friendships were hard, and it felt like, you know, it was just the leaders at youth were my friends, and so then you look at your kid and I can see how you go, well, I don't want them to miss out on friendships because that was a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, so many of our fears for our kids are affected by our own personal fears, and yet when we put God at the center, we can really trust him with these fears. And it's so hopeful to know that we have the Holy Spirit and we have the community of Christ and we have the wisdom of God as we parent, you know, and as we look at, you know, this beautiful story that God's, you know, writing through us, that we actually, you know, I love that passage in Colossians where it talks about our life is hid in Christ, or you could put it as your identity is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who's your life story, appears. So there's this whole idea that we carry this new story, the life story of Jesus himself, and that should, you know, influence how we think about who we are. That, you know, as parents, we're going to suffer like Jesus did. We're going to commune and walk with God, you know, with his help in a way similar to what Jesus did. People are going to oppose us like they opposed Jesus. And yet there's going to be this glorious future with Jesus that we can, you know, hope for and long for with our kids.
So true. I think as well, the whole point, in part, just shifting the question a little bit, but the whole point of parenting through the lens of the gospel as well, is we are working on the assumption and belief and understanding that Jesus is alive. And he wants the best for us and our kids. And there's two paths in front of us that we've got to choose from. Unbelievers aren't thinking like that. Those paths don't exist. They're not sure Jesus exists. It's all out there. But if we're true to that, if we believe Jesus is alive and he wants well for our life and he died for us, well, that's a game changer. If then our kid puts their faith in Jesus, well, if we've put our faith in Jesus as a parent, then the whole premise is my life isn't my own. I'm in this great race. What an opportunity to be ambassador to my kid. The whole paradigm is completely different for what we are trying to do. It's just so very different for the world. The last thing we can do, actually, the more I think about it, even live as we're doing this, the paradigm that the world offers is not congruent to the biblical paradigm. They don't go together. They're so different. You can't map them onto each other.
Yeah, that's so helpful and yet hope-filled, because like if Christ is with us in our parenting, you know, and we keep looking to him, like in so many ways, like we can't go wrong, you know.
Right.
Well, I want us to actually turn towards the practical. And, you know, for the folks listening in, I know so often the temptation is just tell me what to do. Let's get really practical. Obviously, we're about, you know, giving you a biblical framework as best we can. And if there are questions, obviously we're not going to get to everything that people want to ask. Please do write into us and let us know. We'd love to address that in our last episode of the series.
There's anybody else more than our parents,
Mum,
listening to this.
I want to know your questions, Mum.
Yes.
But let's get practical. You know, I'm listening in. I'm wondering, well, how would I even know? How would I know if I'm building my whole lens of life in a worldly way, on something other than Christ? How might I know that I'm worshiping my kids? What might some signs of that be as you reflect on it?
Yeah,
I think first is what priorities you have for your kids. What are the goals you have for your kids? And yeah, it's not wrong to have set goals, but I think what is the focus and what is the priority? Who is the focus behind those? I think that would be a big thing. Like if your goal is just that they grow up and earn enough money to own their own home, like, well, that's great. But like in light of eternity, and that's not wrong to want your kids to own their own home, but if that's the bigger focus, rather than, you know what, I want my kids to love Jesus and follow him no matter what what else they do. So I think that would be a big thing. Just what are the main goals and main priorities? What's the first thing that springs to mind when people ask, what's the most important thing for you for your kids?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really good. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, if you take the whole premise of essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less, what is that thing that you say, as I distill it down, this is the most important thing for my kids to get. And if they don't get this, everything else isn't important. If that answer isn't, man, I'm just desperate for them to know Christ and Him crucified, you've stuck something else in the place of God. And it's probably a sign, not definitely, but it's probably a sign that you're building your life into your kids rather than Christ. You're losing sight of something. So I think there are a few signs. Definitely. I think even fears can be a sign. You know, so the moment when I'm not going to do something that God's called me to do because what will my kids think?
Right.
Okay, well, that's an easy one. That's a Christ or kid, and you've chosen kid. I think in one of our other episodes on discipline, it's like, there's no way I'm going to do that for my kids. It's too much. Okay, so again, we've chosen because Christ has called us to, and we've just chosen the kid instead. I think that would be important. I think the moment, quite frankly, where I can't get to church this week because my kid's got a party. Oh, and next week, actually, yeah, we're doing something else with the kids. And, we don't have date nights, we don't have time. But my kid has 3 sporting events a week. They're all signs that this kid has become your world. And if you have got 2, 3 or 4 and you're doing the same with them all, it sounds like you're just worshipping your kids. That the thing that you're building your life around isn't Christ and Him crucified and His bride. It's whatever the kids' needs are. And we're just going to go around with that and try and fit those other things in. So I think there are a few telltale signs.
So if there's something the Lord's commanding us to do, as Christians calling us to do, and a kid means that we feel we need to compromise on that, then that's probably a sign that
probably a bad sign, isn't it?
That the kids may be taking the place of our Lord Jesus.
Yeah, and look, I've known people do it, Brendan. I mean, even growing up, actually, there was a friend who was not following Jesus, but was actually quite good at football. And so he decided, he probably was only about 10, 11, he decided he didn't want to go to church anymore. He wanted to play football. And his dad didn't want him to see him resent the church and resent God, so he thought, you know what, I'll take him to football. He's now late 30s, not following Jesus at all, totally uninterested. But you think, since you were 10, what you were actually taught is, well, son, I love Jesus, but football's okay as well. Let's do that because that's what you really want to do. It totally backfired. It didn't help anybody at all. And I look back on that and think it was really well-meaning. But you took something that is biblical, which is do not forsake meeting together. You've taken that out because you think a better way of winning your kid might be to go with them and play football. It just doesn't make sense. We've got to hold God's word in our hand and say, this has got to be my plumb line, and then I got to build my family into this. This is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, just as you're talking about that scenario, I can see that temptation to want to please the kid.
It's very well-meaning.
It just reminded me of something that we've been talking about as a team that Jim said when he was out here. Jim Donahue was out here some weeks ago, and he said, they'll be okay with their being lost if you're okay with them being lost. And in some sense, when we compromise in that way with our kids, although well-intentioned, we're sort of saying, I'm okay with the trajectory of moving away from God that you're on, rather than a parent whose heart is saying, you know, I desperately want you to know Jesus, and even if therefore there might be some difficulty with this, we're going to continue to pursue this because I just believe Jesus is the answer for everything. I know as we've been reflecting on this, one thing Tim Keller's said in the past all the time is if we're thinking about what's an idol or something we might be struggling with as an idol, is to think about what are your dreams about? You know, what do you dream about having? And if your dreams for the future often revolve around your kids, that could be a good indication. another thing that he said is the flip side is, what are your nightmares made of? What are you most fearful about? What are your nightmares made of in terms of losing? And that also can be, if they revolve around kids, that could be a good indicator as well. Anything else that you can think of, Em, as your...
I think all those points are great, but I think maybe what do we talk about with our kids? What do we champion? What do we prize? What are we praising them for all the time? So I think that can be a telltale sign. I think it can also be interesting too if your kids are a little bit older, and I don't mean like super old, but maybe 8, 10, ask them, what do you think is the most important thing to mum and dad for you? What do you think we love?
Wow.
Yeah,
what
we
a good
champion
question.
most. Yeah, it can be eye-opening. So I know we've done that with our kids.
What do you think your mum and dad are most passionate about?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I've had some hard truths come out of our kids' mouths. I remember asking them, one of the boys when they were older, what would, if they got married, what would they like their wife to be like in terms of like me, and what would they like to be different? I don't remember what they said in terms of to be like, but I do remember them saying in terms of not be like, they said not go on the phone as much, and I was like, oh, that's
Gutting.
Yeah, there's some definite truth in that one.
But good on you for asking. I mean, so many of us, like listening into that, you get a little bit of shaky, just thinking about asking that question.
I was a little bit shaky. But,
though.
The insight that came out of their mouth, and they weren't very super old, like I said, probably about 10 at the time. So I think, just asking your kids those questions, it's like, I think God can really use them to speak truth.
Yeah, because if we are training our kids in the way they should go, and that's a real paradigm for us and important to us, and they're not saying Jesus. But that's helpful feedback, isn't it? That's how, what do you think Dad's most passionate about? Oh, that's an easy one, Dad. Oh, what would be the answer? Football. You love it. You get so excited. Well, son, do you not think I get excited in worship? No, you look bored, Dad. It's going to be helpful to have these insights. Because I think that is one of the things you were saying about that Tim Keller quote about idols of the heart. I think that's one of the things as well, in terms of, are you more animated when you're talking to your kids about something, or they're showing you a piece of work, or you're watching them in the sport? Are you more excited about that than you are when you're singing in worship on a Sunday? But which one gets you more excited?
That's
more
good.
Excited about Jesus? Or more excited about some kid's presentation? What stirs your emotions more? What affects you? I think sometimes people could be like, oh, I was so impressed with my kid in this, I was in tears. That's wonderful. When was the last time you were in tears as you read the Bible, or you were affected by Jesus? I never. Okay, well, it sounds like there might have been a shift in terms of what's stirring our emotions the most. Sounds like your kids. So I think they're actually really good telltale signs that, we've started to shift from the giver to the gift.
Sorry, Karen.
You go, Em.
I was going to say another thing is, what are we most tempted to discipline them for? Are we more tempted to discipline them if they break a window in the house with their soccer ball, or break our favourite, I don't know, people have ornaments these days, not in the minimalist culture, or the TV.
Some quality Kmart's.
So, or are we more like to discipline for a character that got, going against what God calls us to do, for the lying, or for, the unkindness to their brother or sister, or disrespect towards us? What is it that gets us the most?
Yeah, that's so true. That fits with Paul Tripp's got a book called Parenting, and he's got a whole bunch of points, on this topic of worship that he says could be telltale signs. And the one he has on that list under that is too much temptation to make it personal. It's about you. It's not about God, rather than what is God calling to do. That could be a sign that you're worshiping them. Too much emphasis on doing rather than being. So God's purpose ultimately is to enjoy a relationship with him. Too great a desire for control. You're a control freak. You need them to succeed. Too much concern about reputation. How you look in front of others with your kids. Or too much focus on success.
That's good.
Or more importantly, probably success in the things that matter in their relationship with God. Yeah. Well, I guess...
just one thing on it as well. I think all these things, when we're sitting around talking about it like this, they become quite obvious in a good way. And you're like, oh yeah, that's stinging. We don't want to do that. But in the moment, they're actually really hard to see. And I think sometimes it's well worth a question to a trusted friend. Would you have any concern
Yeah, that's
that
good.
I've started to idolize my kids above Christ. Anything you're seeing, because it is quite hard to see yourself, I think. But a faithful friend, if they're going to be faithful, you might say, yeah, well, look, mate, I just wonder if maybe I hear you talking about this a lot. So we had a friend, for example, that if they'd asked that, they didn't really ask that question, which made it awkward, and we had to sort of bring it up. But the person was constantly applauding how academic the kid was in a certain area. And then the kid got into a very good university and went off and did that. But that individual was thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Where actually a concern as a friend is your kid doesn't even know Jesus at all. And you're championing this as if it's amazing. And let's just go anywhere in the world to pursue this, but we're not even bringing in Christ. And I think for that individual, they weren't trying to be funny. They just couldn't see it. There was like a blind spot.
Right.
So I think it is helpful if we're humble enough to ask others, do you see anything in me in the way I'm bringing up this kid that is unhelpful or might be idolizing, or help me?
I think that's a beautiful repeated refrain that I'm hearing from you guys, which is really just leaning into community, asking them for their perspective, including your kids in that, saying, hey, what do you think we care about? What do you see me as a parent to your friend that we're most passionate about? Is it Jesus? Do we build our life around him and the church? Or is it something else?
Yeah, and you can even do it when they're really, really little. Just with basic words. What do you think Dad loves the most? If you had to pick one thing that I love the most, what would it be? Oh, Dad, that's easy. Chocolate. Okay, thank you. But they're going to give it, but it's still helpful. What's their perspective on what you are most animated about?
That's good. Well, let's keep moving along. We really want to focus on, the application piece of this. How do we grow together? Okay, we've been talking about the gospel-centered parenting. How can we kind of fan that aflame, as parents? How can we build this kind of vision for life into our homes? What are some ideas to help the parent? I'm particularly thinking of someone who's listening to this and they're thinking, don't know what my kids would say. I'd be doubtful they'd say Jesus. Give me some advice.
So you mean if your kid would say, no, actually, I don't think you're passionate about Jesus, what the heck you can do?
Right.
Do you know what the best thing you can give your kids is a mum and a dad, or a mum or a dad if it's a single parent home, that are massively passionate about Jesus. And so the best things you can do for your kids often don't, first of all, include your kids. They just involve you and Jesus.
Yes, agreed.
Because if you're not plugging into Jesus and your relationship isn't real, the kids will pick that more than anything. So the best thing you can do is absolutely love on Jesus. It's like when you sit on a plane and they always do the same, the safety brief. And it's always struck me that, they always say the same thing, that when the masks fall, if you've got a kid beside you, put your own mask on first and then the kids.
That's good.
And your instinct wouldn't be to do that. Your instinct, okay, let's sort my kid out and then I'll look after myself. But the premise being, if you die in the process, that kid didn't do nothing.
True.
And I think it's the same with the Lord. You got to get that mask on yourself before you start giving them a mask. How can you be besotted with Jesus where that kid goes, well, I'll tell you one thing about my dad. He really loves Jesus. It's really real for him. He loves his word. He's passionate about Jesus because he talks about him all the time. And, we always talk about things that we love and are passionate about.
Good.
So I think if our kids aren't instantly saying Jesus, the onus isn't on for us to be irritated with them. The onus is on, I need to be more overtly Jesus. In front of them and making a move in that. The good thing is as well, I don't think you've got to go from 0 to rock star. If you're at 0 and your kids start to see, man, I've noticed my dad's been getting up for like 5 days this week to spend time with Jesus. And then he talks about him at mealtime. That would be huge. That's already a huge change. You're only at 10%, but for them, this is epic.
Yeah.
So your example, what do you think, love?
I was going to just follow on from that. I think as well, it's doing that in a way that dazzles them with who God is and who Jesus is, rather than what's the word, when you're overly heavy and just all rules.
Well, you're not selling them to a process and a rule and this is what you do. These are my roles as a Christian.
I think
duties.
I think your
duties aren't going to attract
joy in your relationship with Jesus.
Delight. Don't give them duty, give them delight.
Yeah. So I think that would definitely be the top thing. I agree with you. Before you do anything else, and I think then who they're spending time with, who you're spending time with, just what you value in friends, who do you look up to, who you respect, and what the people that are following Jesus, and you think, I want my kids to be like them. I would like to be like them. So just again, the community thing is never, you can never talk too much about that. I think just providing your kids with people around them that love Jesus, you just can't do much better than that. Yeah,
our tone is so important as well, isn't it? And in that same vein in terms of with other believers, if you're going to say, for example, you're going to have friends over from church, you can be like, "Well, kids, let's tidy it up. There's friends coming from church again," and it can be that like, "Oh, okay." Or you could be like, "What a privilege that we get to house people that Jesus Christ died for today. And so let's get the house ready, and how can we make it special for them?" Your tone is chipper and upbeat and keen and excited. And same with the way you talk about church. Is it like, "Okay, guys, we better get dressed. It starts in 10 minutes." Okay, well, that's the tone they're getting is it's a bit of an inconvenience, but we should try harder. Yeah. Or you can be like, "Guys, let's get to bed early. It's Saturday night, Sunday morning tomorrow. Isn't it amazing that we get to go and worship Jesus tomorrow? And I can't wait." Well, they're hearing something very different. See, our tone is really, really important for them realising either you love this or you're not into it. I think it was one of the wonders of, I think it's one of the reasons why the crocodile hunter became so effective across the world, because this guy was just so animated and passionate about crocodiles.
Now you're showing your age.
Totally. But he was passionate about crocodiles.
Yeah.
And I think it's our job as parents to be, I want to be as passionate as that about Jesus when I talk about him in front of these little eyes. Because they're going to hear tone and zeal and passion much more than they're going to hear about, "Well, kids, we should have a quiet time because that's what God told us to do and we should do it." And well, that doesn't sound very exciting at all.
Yeah. Or you're dragging them into church half an hour late every week because you couldn't be bothered to get up and organise and out the house a bit early. I mean, we all have those odd weeks where things don't go to plan and we might be a bit later than we planned. Right. But like, if it's just not that important to you, you're just like, "Oh, we'll get there when we get there."
Try our best, but we're tired. And I mean, Sundays are a classic, aren't they? Because I was actually thinking about it, because obviously Amy's getting married, and I thought, you know what, people never rock up late to a wedding. And they never rock up late to a wedding. Why? Because you won't want to walk in after the bride, because she's the most important person on the day. Well, how much more important is Jesus and the bride when we gather on a Sunday? So I want to be there in good time, sitting in my seat, ready to worship him, because as we start singing, he's with us. He's presencing himself. So it's epic.
Yeah, I think maybe what people miss in that is they don't realise when we view church, as not really important, as God's, coming on time is not really a big deal, and because we naturally tell ourselves, "Well, come on, like, let's not get too uptight about it. We get there when we can, and we're a family, so it's okay." But we don't realize that actually we're painting this picture in our own minds and for our kids of what the world says about this moment, which is that life is about me and I'm at the center of everything, and church is just a piece of the puzzle in my life as I go about my life, rather than the story of the gospel says the whole universe is about Jesus, who came for us, loved us, laid down his life for us, rose in glory, is present with us, and is coming again soon when we'll be with him, worshipping with his people forever. And that this moment on Sunday is a picture of that moment on Sunday, because Jesus is Lord and not me. And we don't even realize that in the way we look at it, for our kids looking on, for ourselves, we're buying into this kind of consumer mentality where Jesus is just one of many things I've got going on in my life.
Rather than the center of the world.
Yeah.
That you're like, no, we build our life around.
So
I grew up in a home, and I think you did as well, Em, where for my parents, I mean, I actually don't recall ever missing church for anything. Unless they're literally vomiting. We were at church. Even when we had friends and family come and stay on the weekend and they weren't coming to church, my dad would still sit the rest of us in the car and off we went to church. And he would say to her, I guess, "Hey, we go to church." I said, "We'd love you to come, but if you don't, you could just hang in the house." And then we go. That was the lifestyle.
Right.
So we knew, to my parents, I mean, even before we were Christians, but to my parents, well, Jesus is really important to you.
Right.
And this is who we are. That was obvious. And so I think of Joshua, as for me and my house will worship the Lord. I grew up with parents that definitely that was their reality.
Right.
And it definitely wasn't duty. They were so excited to go. And so we thought church was a great place.
Yeah, absolutely. I know another thing that Brian Rosner mentions in his, he's got an awesome book called Finding Yourself Why Looking Within's Not the Answer. And I really recommend it. We'll put some details, to it in the show notes. But one of the ways we can get into this, gospel lens as well is being meaningfully involved in the church community as well, like having relationships where we're actually vulnerable with one another, in the faith community, where we're not just attending, but we're genuinely sharing. And this includes our kids, our struggles and challenges and, and repenting before allowing the truth of the gospel to minister to us as we share the things that we're finding really hard as well.
Yeah,
it's good.
What would you say to the parent, again, who feels that maybe the kid has been at the center and yet they've got all these different commitments they've already made that are leaving them feel a little bit trapped?
Yeah, I think there's many things you could do, but I think if you've started to be convicted that I think my kid is at the center, but I feel trapped, you're never trapped. So already you're believing a lie. You're believing that something cannot change. Well, anything can change. You can change anything actually, unless you signed it in blood for some reason. You can change anything. Oh, well, I made a commitment that my kid would play in this sports team. Okay. Well, tell them that there's been a change of plan. Well, they're not going to like me anymore. Okay. But in light of eternity, it's probably not the end of the world. Most things are not undoable. I think a few things that are helpful is I think it's very important that we're not afraid of repenting before our kids. I think one of the most beautiful things in the gospel, and I think one of the things our kids often remember, is when you say, you know what, son, you know what, daughter, I realise I've not been a faithful dad to you. Because functionally it's like you become my everything. And I want you to be important to me, but I want Jesus to be the best thing in my life. And I failed to do that. I'm so sorry. That could be a great conversation starter. Well, what do you mean, Dad? How have you just worship me rather than Jesus? Well, let me give you an illustration, and I want that to change. They could be a really powerful moment. So I think not being afraid of repenting in front of our kids is really, really important. I think also just regularly getting out the calendar and finding time to review. So, I love essentialism, I that by instinct, but also by study. The whole premise of, what's best next and the disciplined pursuit of less. I think one of the things it's always helpful to do is once a term or once a semester to take out a pen and paper, take some time and really map out per kid, what am I actually trying to do for them to show them Christ and Him crucified? What is the plan? So if that's my aim, then is what I'm giving ourselves to, does that map onto that? So if we're saying all I want to do is train them in the way they should go show Christ, but then you can't show me in your diary any way that you're doing that, well, that doesn't make sense. So I think if we realise we need to make a change, we need to be quite brutal and make a change. One of the things I would definitely say as well on that, Brendan, is I think the idea that, this is just a season and in the next season I'll try and address that with my kid, that never works. The seasons go by really quickly and before you know it, you're waving them off. It goes faster than you think. So I think if there's a conviction there, then this weekend, take an hour and work out what you're going to do.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think as well. I think if you're feeling convicted by that, I think be encouraged. I think be encouraged that God is at work.
That's good.
That the Spirit's at work in you. So I think there can be that temptation to go into condemnation and think of all the things that you haven't done that you maybe should have. But I think if God's convicting you of that, that's because He wants to help you change and grow. So to be encouraged in that, I think God gives wisdom to those who ask. So I think I'd spend some time in prayer, just seeking God's wisdom in how He would like you to change in that. And then I think, as we've been talking about throughout all these different podcasts, bring in community, speak to people that you respect in this area, that you think model it well, and ask them, okay, what are you doing? How do you plan your schedule? Like, if you were me, what would you do? What would you change? Or I'm seeking to change this. How do you think might be the best way to go about it? So I think just having those conversations. But I think if God's at work, then that's something to be encouraged about, not down about. So I think that's great, and anticipate grace in the change.
That's so good, Em. Well, lastly, I'm just mindful of the time, but we've got time for one last quick question, quick fire thoughts. I'm just mindful of the parent who's wanting a Christ-centric home, but they're married to an unbeliever. Any last parting thoughts for that mum or dad?
Yeah. Well, firstly, obviously, it's a difficult spot to be in. You know, it's a difficult spot to be in. I think the Bible is clear. We don't want to be marrying an unbeliever. So I think if people haven't got into that situation yet and they're listening to that, you need to be very wise. But I'm assuming this is a conversation where somebody has become a Christian and then they're married to an unbeliever that they both were when they got married. And I think it's a very difficult spot to be in. The best advice I could give that individual is to live flat out, full steam ahead for Jesus within your marriage. And you're going to have to trust the kid to choose. My experience is when the kids are little, the mum or dad is often fine for you to take them kids with you. And so for years, that's often what people do. And then as the kids get a bit older, they decide they would rather stay with the unbelieving spouse and do something else. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road for the parent.
Right.
Because the temptation for the Christian mum or dad can be, I'm just going to stay home and be with them because otherwise I'm never going to see them. And I think that's the biggest mistake you can make. Because I think what they actually need to see is, my mum or dad that know Jesus, it's very different.
Right.
They really know him. And it shows in their life. The last thing you should do is water it down. I think warm it up.
Yeah, that's good.
Show them Christ in your life and dazzle them with the gospel through the way you live is the best thing you can do.
That's great.
And I think then just pray for your kids and trust God with your kids. I mean, out of all we've talked about in this episode, obviously, trying to parent through gospel lens, we can do all these things, but we can't save our kids. This isn't going to save our kids.
Yes.
So praying for them, and then trusting God with the outcome and the path He chooses for them.
And praise God that in the right sense for that Christian mum or dad, even though their spouse is an unbeliever, praise God that kid has got a mum or a dad that is running flat out for Jesus.
Yeah.
I think that's going to have an effect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thanks for your time, and for Willow as well. Thank you.
Yeah, she's asleep.
She's lying.
I
flat
felt her
on
contributions were very effective tonight. I don't know whether she can feature in other episodes or.
We were nervous she was going to get a bit too chatty, but she's done very well.
She's done very well.
Well, thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Imperfect Parent podcast. Our next episode is going to be on bubble wrap, safe spaces, and non-resilient parenting. Are we all just too sheltered today? Don't forget, subscribe and leave us a review. That'll help others find us. You've been listening to the Imperfect Parent podcast, Gospel Hope for Imperfect Parents. I'm Brendan. Thanks so much for listening, and hopefully join us again in 2 weeks. God bless.